The texts of the New Testament have been changed, and that's just not up for debate. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and to acknowledge that the texts of the New Testament have been changed is not to insist that we haven't already resolved the overwhelming majority of those changes, because we have. It's to acknowledge that when we look at the thousands of different manuscripts that we have, we can see an awful lot of differences among them. We can see that change has been introduced. The texts have been changed. But because of all that manuscript evidence, we can reconstruct a version of the New Testament that we can be pretty confident quite closely matches what came from the pens of the original authors. And this is why, if you look at a translation of the New Testament that was published within the last few decades, they will almost certainly omit entire verses, such as Matthew 17:21, where it'll just skip over it in the main body of the text, and you'll have to go to the footnote to read it, and there'll usually be a comment like, some ancient authorities include this, but the earliest manuscripts don't have it. Something similar is going on with the story of the woman taken in adultery and the long ending of the Gospel of Mark, where those things are not in the earliest manuscripts, and scholars are pretty confident that they are secondary additions. But because of their length and how embedded in the tradition they are, they tend to be included in the main body of the text, and the footnote will point out that these are not in the earliest manuscripts. So we've been able to resolve the overwhelming majority of the changes that we can see being introduced to the text. My question is, what changes were introduced that we have not been able to detect? Because there's a gap of varying length between when scholars believe a text of the New Testament was originally composed and our earliest manuscript witness to any given verse from that text. And that gap is sometimes a matter of just a couple or a few decades for about 36 or so words from the Gospel of John, to well over a century for the majority of the verses of the New Testament. And where we do have multiple manuscript witnesses, invariably there are differences. So I don't think the assumption is merited that where we lack any manuscript witnesses, no changes were introduced, particularly because in the earliest years of the circulation of the manuscript, change is going to be more difficult to discern, and so is going to be more likely to be perpetuated. And so while some scholars assume that we have all the manuscript evidence that we need to reconstruct the New Testament exactly as it came from the pens of the authors, I think it is far more responsible to assume that there have been changes introduced to the text of the New Testament that we don't have enough evidence to be able to detect, and we probably never will. And the fit for this video needs no introduction.